After the divorce, he thought nothing could shake him anymore. But when he discovered his ex-wife had given birth to his quadruplets, the millionaire froze, and his heart of stone began to crumble. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post every day. Continuing. Helen observed her reflection in the mirror as she adjusted the red dress that embraced every curve of her body with almost indecent precision. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the ruby earring to her left ear. It wasn't the nervousness of the party awaiting her, but the audacity of what she was about to do. After 5 years of marriage to Roderick Albright, one of the country's most influential businessmen, she had become a shadow in her own life, a decorative figure who occupied the space of a wife without truly existing in her husband's eyes. The Plaza Hotel glittered that night, welcoming the crème de la crème of New York society for another charity event organized by some bored socialite. Helen knew the protocol by heart: smile politely, make superficial comments about art or fashion, and remain by Roderick's side like a well-chosen accessory that complemented his image as a successful man. But not tonight. Tonight she would be seen. "We're late," Roderick said, entering the room without knocking, his eyes fixed on the wristwatch that cost more than many families' cars. When he finally looked at his wife, his next words died before leaving his lips. The red dress Helen had chosen was a declaration of war. The deep neckline revealed more than it concealed, and the side slit climbed dangerously up her thigh. Her black hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Instead of the usual elegant and discreet bun, she looked like another woman, or perhaps for the first time in years, she truly looked like herself. "You're not going out like that," he declared, his voice low and controlled, but with a note of discomfort Helen rarely heard. "I am indeed," she replied, applying another layer of red lipstick without diverting her eyes from her own reflection. "This dress cost a small fortune on your credit card. It would be a waste, don't you think?" Roderick opened his mouth to retort, but his cell phone rang, interrupting the moment. As always, work came first. Helen watched him answer the call and dive into a discussion about contracts and acquisitions, her world momentarily forgotten once again. She picked up her handbag, left the room, and descended the stairs of the mansion on the Upper East Side. The chauffeur was already waiting, and Roderick appeared minutes later, still on the phone. Their entrance at the Plaza Hotel was exactly as Helen had planned. The buzz subsided as she stepped out of the car, and male and female gazes turned to admire or criticize her appearance. The red dress contrasted with the sea of black and navy dresses that dominated the event. Roderick, finally hanging up the phone, noticed the stares his wife attracted. His jaw visibly tightened. "What are you trying to prove?" he murmured, guiding her through the ballroom with a possessive hand placed on her bare back. "That I still exist," Helen replied, smiling radiantly at a senator who approached to greet them. The night progressed like a tense chess game. Helen moved through the ballroom with studied grace, accepting champagne flutes and conversing animatedly with men who normally would barely notice her presence. She didn't openly flirt, but she also didn't discourage admiration. For the first time in years, she felt alive, visible, real. And with every glance she attracted, she noticed Roderick watching from afar, his face a mask of civility that barely hid something primitive and possessive in his eyes. It was then that Charles Maxwell, an Argentinian businessman known for his reputation as a charmer, approached her on the balcony where she had gone for fresh air. "A woman like you shouldn't be alone on a night like this," he said, with an accent that made every word a caress. Helen smiled, feeling the champagne take effect. "I'm not alone. I'm married." "Married, yes, but alone nonetheless," he replied, leaning closer. "I know that look well. It's the look of someone dying of thirst beside a river that refuses to quench it." The words hit Helen with unexpected force, unmasking in seconds the charade she herself had created. Before she could respond, she felt a presence behind her. "Helen, we need to go," Roderick said, his voice colder than the marble beneath her feet. In the car, the silence was heavy as lead. Helen watched the city lights pass by the window, while Roderick kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel, until his knuckles turned white. He had dismissed the chauffeur, something he never did. "What was that?" he finally asked, when they stopped at the traffic light on Fifth Avenue. "What was what?" "Don't play innocent, Helen. The dress, the behavior, that Argentinian—" "Oh, so you noticed," she said, turning to face him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a surprise. I thought you only had eyes for that cell phone screen." The light turned green, but Roderick didn't move the car, ignoring the honks behind them. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about 5 years." "Roderick, 5 years being a beautiful trophy on your shelf. 5 years dining alone while you work late. 5 years waiting for you to remember you have a wife." "I work to give you all this," he said, gesturing vaguely to indicate their luxurious lifestyle. Helen laughed, a bitter sound that seemed to fill the car. "All this? You think I want things? Expensive dresses, jewelry, trips you always cancel at the last minute?" Her voice faltered. "I want you, Roderick. I want the man who looked me in the eyes when he spoke to me, who cared about what I thought, who made love to me as if the world would end the next day." Roderick's face hardened. "I grew up in a family that had nothing, Helen. You don't understand what that's like. Everything I achieved was through sacrifice. And I'm just another sacrifice on your list of achievements?" When they arrived home, the argument fully erupted. Helen let out all her frustration, the loneliness, the deferred dreams, the empty days filled with superficial activities to mask the void. Roderick, always controlled, always rational, seemed genuinely surprised by the intensity of her feelings, as if he had never truly stopped to consider that his absence left deep marks. "Do you want me to choose between you and the company? Is that it?" he asked finally, when both were too exhausted to keep shouting. Helen shook her head, tired. "No, Roderick. I want you to realize that there is no choice. Either you have room for both in your life or you deserve neither." She went upstairs, leaving him alone in the living room, with his certainties shaken for the first time in years. In the bedroom, she took off the red dress and threw it to the back of the closet. That night had been a breaking point. Now it remained to be seen whether what came next would be a reconstruction or a definitive separation. The next morning, Helen woke up alone in the king-size bed. Nothing unusual, except for the fact that it was Saturday, and even then Roderick usually got up early to deal with pending matters in the office set up downstairs. She took a long shower, trying to wash away the emotional hangover from the night before. As she descended the stairs, mentally preparing to find an empty house, she was surprised by the smell of fresh coffee and the faint sound of music coming from the kitchen. Roderick was there, his back to the entrance, concentrating on something on the stove. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, a look she barely remembered seeing in recent years. On the table, cut fruit, bread, juices, and flowers. Flowers she knew hadn't been bought by the housekeeper, for she recognized the roses from the garden she herself tended. "What is this?" she asked, her voice still hoarse with sleep. He turned, holding a spatula and looking almost embarrassed. "Breakfast, or at least an attempt. I think I ruined the eggs." The gesture was so unexpected, so out of character for the Roderick he had become in recent years, that Helen didn't know how to react. She sat at the table, watching him place the eggs, which were indeed poorly made, on a plate in front of her. "You didn't go to work," she observed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "No." He sat opposite her, pouring himself coffee. "I sent an email saying I was taking the weekend off. It must have caused a small heart attack for the office staff." Helen tasted the coffee, avoiding his eyes. "Why?" "Because you're right," he said simply. "Last night after you went upstairs, I sat there," he pointed to the living room, "thinking about everything you said. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time we had breakfast together on a Saturday. I couldn't remember the last time we really talked, not about appointments or bills, but about us." He paused. "I couldn't remember the last time I saw you smile because of something I did." Helen felt a knot in her throat. It was exactly what she wanted to hear, but distrust hung like a dark cloud. How many promises of change had been made and forgotten over the years? One morning doesn't fix 5 years, Roderick. I know. He extended his hand across the table, not touching hers, but leaving the offer of contact hanging in the air between them. "But Maybe it's a start. The following days were strange, as if both were learning to be a couple again. Roderick truly kept his word about staying away from work that weekend. They watched movies Helen chose, walked along the beach, dined at a small downtown restaurant where no one would recognize him. He seemed genuinely interested in rediscovering the woman he had married. On Monday, when he announced he needed to go to the office, Helen felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Here we go again, she thought, but Roderick surprised her. "I'll be back for dinner," he promised, kissing her on the forehead, "and no cell phone at the table." And he kept his word. In the following weeks, a new routine was established. Roderick still worked intensely, but now there were boundaries, sacred dinners, protected weekends, moments when the businessman gave way to the husband. Small gestures gradually rebuilt trust. Messages during the day, flowers for no special occasion, sincere questions about Helen's projects, who had abandoned her career as an architect to be the perfect wife. "You should go back to work," Roderick suggested one night, as she showed him some of her old projects. "Open your own firm if you want. I have contacts who could help." Helen hesitated. The idea was tempting, but also daunting. "I don't want anything because I'm your wife, Roderick. If I go back, I want it to be on my own merit." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's exactly why I fell in love with you." The reconciliation progressed, fragile but constant, like a boat sailing in calm waters after a storm. Helen slowly allowed herself to believe that perhaps there was a second chance for them, until a message on her cell phone destroyed everything. It was a typical Tuesday. Helen was at home working on a preliminary project for a possible return to architecture. Her cell phone vibrated with a notification from an unknown number. The message was direct, without beating around the bush. "Did he tell you how your marriage really started? Ask about Clara Miller and the deal that saved his company from bankruptcy 5 years ago." Helen stared at the message, feeling her blood run cold. Clara Miller. The name was vaguely familiar. An heiress, daughter of a prominent real estate investor, someone Helen had met at social events a few times, always with a cold smile and a look that seemed to hold some secret. Her hands trembled as she opened her phone's browser and searched the name. Old articles appeared, showing Clara at social events, always dazzling, always surrounded by powerful men. And in one of the photos, dated 5.5 years ago, there was Roderick beside her at a charity gala. The caption mentioned rumors of a relationship between the rising businessman and the heiress. 5.5 years ago, exactly when she and Roderick started dating. Exactly when his company, which was facing financial difficulties according to newspapers at the time, suddenly recovered with a mysterious capital injection. Helen felt nauseous. The pieces began to fit together in a way she had never considered. She remembered how her courtship with Roderick had been quick and intense, how he had insisted on a hasty marriage without grand celebrations, just an intimate ceremony with few guests. How, after the wedding, he had become increasingly absent, increasingly focused on the empire he was building. When Roderick arrived home that night, he found Helen sitting in the darkness of the living room, only the bluish light of her cell phone illuminating her pale face. "Helen, what's wrong?" he asked, turning on the lights and immediately noticing that something was amiss. She held up her cell phone, showing him the message. "Who is Clara Miller, Roderick?" His expression subtly changed. It wasn't surprise she saw, but something worse: recognition and guilt. "Where did this come from?" "It doesn't matter where it came from. What matters is if it's true." She stood up, her legs feeling weak. "Was our marriage a business arrangement?" Roderick closed his eyes for a moment, and that simple gesture was a confession clearer than any words. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. "We can talk about this. I can explain." "So it's true," Helen whispered, feeling as if the ground were disappearing beneath her feet. Everything was a lie. "No, it wasn't like that. In the beginning, yes, there was an agreement. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Clara's father offered an investment that would save everything with one condition: that you distance yourself from his daughter and marry someone respectable to improve your public image," Helen completed, the words coming out like acid from her mouth. And I was perfect, wasn't I? From a good family, educated, naive enough to believe that a man like you actually fell in love with me. I fell in love with you, Roderick insisted, taking a step towards her. Maybe not at first, but it happened. What I feel for you is real. Helen recoiled, putting more distance between them. How can I believe anything you say now? Her voice trembled. Our entire marriage was built on a lie. I was used, manipulated, a pawn in your game of power and money. It's not that simple. His voice had an urgency she had never heard before. Yes, the marriage started the wrong way, but what we built together is real. The last 5 years, everything we shared... What we shared, she interrupted, anger now overcoming the initial shock. Your absence, your disinterest. It took 5 years and a red dress for you to finally pay attention. To me. The tears she had held back began to fall freely now. All the fragile happiness of the past few weeks, all the hope of reconstruction, everything had been built on quicksand. I'm leaving, she declared, suddenly determined. Helen, please, we can get through this. She shook her head, already heading for the stairs. There's nothing to get through, Roderick. There's no us to fix. There are only lies and a contract you meticulously fulfilled, maintaining appearances while building your empire. Congratulations, you got what you wanted. That same night, Helen packed 2 suitcases with essentials and called a taxi. Roderick tried to stop her, pleaded for a chance to explain everything in detail, promised he could prove his love was true, despite the misguided beginning. But she was beyond words now. The trust, already so fragile from years of emotional neglect, had been completely shattered by the revelation. As the taxi pulled away from the mansion, Helen didn't look back. Tears blurred her vision, but her resolve was clear. She needed to rediscover who she was away from the shadow of that marriage. She needed to find the woman she had been before becoming Mrs. Albright. She needed, above all, to learn to trust again, first herself, then perhaps others. The driver asked where she wanted to go, and Helen hesitated only a moment before giving the address of her friend Louise, the only one who had always said Roderick didn't deserve her, the only one who might welcome her without too many questions on that night of devastating revelations. As the taxi cut through the city, taking her away from the life she had built on illusions, Helen felt, amidst the pain, a strange sense of liberation, as if, somehow, the truth, however painful, finally gave her the chance to truly exist. Louise's small apartment in Chelsea was the opposite of the mansion Helen had left behind. 2 cramped bedrooms, a living room that also served as an office, and a kitchen where barely 2 people could fit. But there was something there that the mansion on the Upper East Side never had, genuine coziness. On the walls, photos of family and friends. On the shelves, beloved and reread books. In the air, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the faint sound of Brazilian music playing. You can stay as long as you need, Louise said, tidying the guest room with clean sheets. But you'll have to tell me this story properly. 5 years married to the man and suddenly you leave home with 2 suitcases and eyes swollen from crying? Helen collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. It was all a lie, Lou, from the beginning. When she finished telling the whole story, from the mysterious message to Roderick's confession, Louise was sitting beside her on the bed, holding her hand tightly. That son of a bitch, she murmured, putting an arm around her friend's shoulders. I always knew there was something wrong. With that whirlwind marriage. He never fooled me with that love-at-first-sight talk. I fell for it like an idiot, Helen said, wiping away tears. I gave up my career, my dreams, everything to be his perfect wife. And in the end, it was just a business, a damned business deal. And now? What are you going to do? Helen looked out the window, at the city lights beginning to come on as evening approached. Start over. Find work as an architect again. Maybe open my own firm as I always wanted. And what about him? Roderick? Helen shrugged, trying to appear more indifferent than she truly felt. He can keep his empire. I don't want anything from him, no alimony, no share in the company, nothing. I just want to forget that I ever believed in him. But forgetting Roderick Albright proved more difficult than Helen imagined. In the following days, he flooded her phone with desperate messages and calls. He sent flowers, gifts, handwritten letters, things he had never done in their 5 years of marriage. Helen deleted the messages without reading them, returned the gifts, tore up the letters. The pain of the betrayal was too recent to consider any explanation. Louise helped her find a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. The professional was visibly surprised when Helen refused any financial compensation. "Mrs. Albright, by law, you are entitled to half of the assets acquired during the marriage. We are talking about a considerable fortune." "I don't want his money," Helen replied firmly. "I just want my name back and my freedom." "He will fight the divorce," the lawyer warned. "Men like Roderick Albright are not used to losing." And he was right. When the papers arrived, Roderick refused to sign them. Instead, he showed up at the lawyer's office demanding a meeting with Helen. She refused. He then began to appear in places she frequented, always maintaining a safe distance, just observing from afar, as if studying her movements, waiting for the right moment to approach. Helen's life gradually took a new turn. With the help of Louise, who worked at a construction company, she secured a position as a junior architect, a step back in her career, but a necessary fresh start. She rented a small apartment in Brooklyn Heights and began to fill it with objects that reflected her personality, not the image she had cultivated as the wife of a successful businessman. Plants everywhere, vibrant colors, art and architecture books piled on the floor, a space that screamed freedom. It was on a normal Wednesday, returning from work, that Helen felt the first dizziness. She attributed it to fatigue and the suffocating summer heat. But the next morning, as she tried to get out of bed, the world spun violently. She barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. She thought of food poisoning. Perhaps the fish she had eaten the night before wasn't fresh. She called the construction company to say she wouldn't be coming, to work and return to bed, hoping the malaise would pass. It didn't pass. In the following days, morning sickness became routine, accompanied by a fatigue that seemed to drain all her energy. Louise, worried, insisted she see a doctor. "It's just a virus," Helen argued. "It'll pass. Or it could be something more serious. It doesn't hurt to get a checkup." Reluctantly, Helen finally agreed to see a doctor when, during an important presentation at the construction company, she almost fainted. The diagnosis couldn't have been more surprising. "Congratulations, Mrs. Albright. You are pregnant." Helen stared at the doctor, as if he had just spoken in an unknown language. "That's impossible. I'm on birth control." "No method is 100% effective," the doctor explained patiently. "And from your tests, I'd say you're approximately 6 weeks along." 6 weeks. Helen did the math mentally. The period would coincide with the last weeks with Roderick, when he seemed determined to win her back after the red dress crisis, when sex between them had once again become intense, passionate, like in the early days. "Doctor," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, "is it normal to feel so much nausea and dizziness so early in pregnancy?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, studying the test results more closely. "Well, your hormone levels are significantly elevated. That could explain the intense symptoms. Let's do an ultrasound to check if everything is okay with the baby." What followed was like a fever dream. Helen lying on the cold examination table, the cold gel on her still flat belly, the doctor moving the transducer, the concentrated silence. And then, "Well, that explains the elevated hormone levels," the doctor commented with a slight smile. "What's wrong?" Helen asked, alarmed. "Is something wrong?" "No, Mrs. Albright. Everything is absolutely normal, except for the fact that you are not expecting one baby." He turned the screen so she could see. "You are expecting 4. The world seemed to disappear for a moment. Helen heard a distant hum, and the room began to darken at the edges of her vision. 4, she whispered when she finally found her voice. "Quadruplets. 2 boys and 2 girls, from what I can see. Perfectly healthy, with strong heartbeats." Helen left the office in a state of shock. The ultrasound image clutched to her chest as if it were both a blessing and a curse. 4 babies. 4 tiny beings growing inside her. 4 lives for which she would be responsible. And she was alone. Louise, the first to know, reacted with a mixture of shock and enthusiasm. "My goodness, Helen, you never do anything by halves, do you?" But seeing her friend's lost expression, her tone changed. "You'll manage, and you're not alone. You have me. You have your parents, your friends, and their father," Helen added softly. The truth she had been avoiding since leaving the doctor's office finally surfaced. Roderick needed to know, not for him but for the babies. They had the right to know their father, and Roderick had the right to know his children, regardless of what had happened between them. Picking up the phone to call him was one of the hardest things Helen had ever done. Her fingers trembled over the screen, dialing the number she, despite everything, still knew by heart. "Helen?" His voice came immediately, as if he had been waiting for her call for weeks. "Thank goodness. I was so worried. How are you?" "We need to talk," she said, ignoring the concern in his voice. "In person. Tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon, at the cafe near my work." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course I'll be there, Helen. Tomorrow, Roderick," she interrupted, and hung up before he could say anything else. The cafe was a neutral place, public enough to avoid scenes, but discreet enough for a private conversation. Helen arrived purposefully a few minutes late, so she wouldn't have to wait. Roderick was already there, sitting at a table in the back, his eyes fixed on the door. When he saw her, he stood up immediately, as if propelled by a spring. He looked different. Thinner, with pronounced dark circles under his eyes, and an unshaven beard he would never have allowed during his impeccable executive days. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, none of the custom-tailored suits that were his trademark. "You look beautiful," were his first words as she sat opposite him. Helen ignored the comment. She placed her bag on the table and took out the envelope with the ultrasound scan. "I'm pregnant," she announced without preamble, pushing the envelope towards him. Roderick froze, his eyes fixed on the envelope as if it contained a bomb about to explode. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice almost inaudible. 6 weeks. They're yours, obviously." He opened the envelope with trembling hands, and Helen watched his face as he looked at the image. Confusion, then shock, then a kind of awe she had never seen on his face before. "4?" he asked, looking from the image to her with wide eyes. Are they 4 babies?" "Quadruplets. 2 boys, 2 girls." Roderick covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes fixed on the ultrasound. When he finally looked at Helen again, there were unshed tears in his eyes. I don't know what to say. It's a miracle." He reached a hand across the table as if to touch hers, but stopped halfway. "What are you going to do?" The question caught Helen by surprise. She had imagined several reactions: shock, disbelief, even the suspicion that she was using the pregnancy to get something from him. But not this immediate acceptance and this question that placed the decision entirely in her hands. "I'm going to have them, of course," she replied. "That's not why I'm here." "No, I know, He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness she knew well. "What can I do? What do you need? Money, a bigger place to live, the best doctors." "I don't want your money, Roderick." "Then what? Why tell me if you don't want anything from me?" Helen took a deep breath. "Because they are your children too. Because regardless of what happened between us, they have the right to know their father. And you have the right to know them. But that doesn't mean we're getting back together." Roderick nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the ultrasound image. "I understand." He seemed genuinely resigned, even respectful of her position. "Can I at least be present during the pregnancy? Doctor's appointments, preparations, that sort of thing?" Helen hesitated. The idea of having Roderick around, seeing him regularly, facing the memories and confused feelings he still evoked in her. But on the other hand, 4 babies, a high-risk pregnancy, a future with challenges she was just beginning to comprehend. "All right," she finally agreed, "but with one condition: total honesty from now on. No secrets, no manipulations. If I find out you're lying to me again, even about something small, you will never see these children again." "Accepted," he replied without hesitation. "Total honesty. You can ask me anything, and I promise to tell you the truth, however difficult it may be. Start by telling me exactly what the deal with Clara's father was." Roderick took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Then, in a low voice so as not to be overheard by neighboring tables, he told her everything. How his company was on the verge of bankruptcy after a failed project. How he had become involved with Clara, more out of social convenience than real affection. How her father, Augustus Miller, a ruthless investor, had discovered his daughter, planned to run away with Roderick abroad, abandoning her position in the family business. Augustus called me for a private meeting. He said I had two paths, complete ruin, financial and social, or a deal. He would invest enough to save my company, with extremely favorable conditions, but I would have to break up with Clara and marry someone suitable within 6 months. Someone who could improve my public image, bring respectability to my name, and most importantly, never, ever tell anyone the truth. And you accepted, Helen concluded, a bitter taste in her mouth. I was desperate, Roderick admitted. I had 200 employees who would depend on welfare if the company closed. I had invested everything I had, mortgaged my parents' house. He paused. And to be completely honest, I never loved Clara. It was a convenient relationship for both of us. She wanted someone to annoy her father, and I wanted her family's connections. And then you met me. And then I met you. His gaze softened. At first, yes, I approached you because you met the requirements Augustus had set. Good family, educated, serious, no past scandals. But Helen, I swear on everything sacred, I fell in love with you, truly. When? She asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. When exactly did you realize you weren't just fulfilling an agreement? Roderick thought for a moment. On our third date, you took me to that contemporary architecture exhibition, remember? I was bored, hating every minute, until you started explaining the projects with so much enthusiasm, so much passion. Suddenly I saw the beauty you saw. It was like you had lent me your eyes for a few hours. He smiled faintly at the memory. At that moment I knew I truly wanted to be with you, agreement or not. Helen wanted to believe him. A part of her, the same part that had fallen madly in love 5 years earlier, desperately wanted it to be true. But another part, more cautious, more wounded, couldn't trust. If you loved me so much, why did you distance yourself after the wedding? Why did you turn me into an accessory, a trophy wife, without a voice, without a real presence in your life? The question seemed to have caught him off guard. I don't know, he admitted, his gaze dropping to the table. I guess, deep down, I felt guilty. Every time I looked at you, I remembered how it had all started, and then I plunged into work, as if somehow I could compensate for the initial lie by building an empire for you. I never wanted an empire, Roderick. I just wanted you. Those simple words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the pain of the truth. I know. Now, I know. They remained silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The cafe around them continued its normal hum, people coming and going, lives pursuing their course, oblivious to the drama unfolding at that back table. What happened to Clara? Helen finally asked, realizing there were still missing pieces in the puzzle. Augustus sent her to London after I broke up with her. She got married there, had children as far as I know. She returned to the States recently, after her divorce. He hesitated. It was she who sent you the message. How do you know that? She contacted me a few weeks ago, said she had seen me on TV talking about the company's expansion, and that it seemed her father's deal had been worth every penny. His expression hardened. When I replied that my marriage had nothing to do with that old agreement, she laughed, said she was going to show you who I really was. Why? After all this time? Revenge, perhaps, or simply bitterness. Her marriage failed, while I prospered. Some spirits can't stand to see others' happiness. Helen wanted to ask more, to know every detail of that sordid story that had defined her life without her knowing. But suddenly she felt exhausted. The weight of the pregnancy, the revelations, the decisions she would have to make from now on seemed overwhelming. I need to go, she said, picking up her bag. Helen, Roderick called as she was already standing. May I? He pointed to the ultrasound still on the table. May I keep this? I have a copy. She nodded. and something in the way he carefully tucked the image into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, touched her in a way she hadn't expected. Next appointment is Friday, 10 a.m., at Mount Sinai Hospital. She didn't know why she was saying that, only that it felt like the right thing to do. If you want to come, I'll be there, he promised, with an intensity that left no doubt. When Helen left the cafe, she felt strangely lighter, as if part of the weight she carried had been divided. She hadn't forgiven Roderick, nor had she decided to give their marriage a second chance. But for the first time since she had discovered the truth, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that, perhaps, just perhaps, amidst so many lies, his love could be true. On Friday, Roderick was at the hospital half an hour before the scheduled time. Dressed casually, without the intimidating air of a powerful businessman, he seemed almost vulnerable as he waited in the waiting room, nervously flipping through a parenting magazine. The appointment was surreal. The doctor, surprised to see the famous businessman there, treated him with exaggerated deference. The ultrasound revealed 4 perfectly formed tiny beings, each with a strong, pulsating heart. Helen, lying on the examination table, observed Roderick's marveling expression, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. When the doctor left for a moment to retrieve the test results, he turned to her with teary eyes. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this," he said simply. Something in that genuine gratitude, in that vulnerability she had never seen in him before, began to crack the wall Helen had built around her heart. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new understanding between them. The following months established a strange routine between Helen and Roderick. They weren't together, but they weren't completely separated either. He attended all medical appointments, helped her find a larger apartment, more suitable for 4 babies, and insisted on paying for everything, something that, after much discussion, Helen accepted as his responsibility towards their children, not as a favor to her. The quadruplet pregnancy was challenging. By 4 months, Helen already looked 6 months pregnant with a normal pregnancy. The nausea persisted and fatigue was constant. The doctor recommended rest and she had to take leave from work. Louise visited every day, but it was Roderick who appeared every evening after work, bringing dinner, checking if she was comfortable, sometimes simply sitting in the living room to talk. "You don't have to come every day," Helen said one night, watching him tidy the kitchen after dinner, something he never would have done during their marriage. "I know," he continued, putting away the dishes, "but I want to be here. For them, and for you." Roderick's constant presence was confusing for Helen. Part of her wanted to keep her distance, to protect her already wounded heart. Another part yearned for the closeness, for the sense of security that, despite everything, she still felt when he was around. And there was also a growing perception that the man who now spent hours assembling cribs and researching fetal development was different from the absent husband she had known. "What happened to the company?" she asked one night, noticing that he now rarely spoke of work. Roderick, who was organizing newly bought baby clothes, paused for a moment. "I hired a CEO. I'm gradually stepping back." "You? Stepping back from the company you built?" He shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "I have 4 children on the way. That's more important than any business." Helen studied him, trying to find signs that this was just another role he was playing, another manipulation. But all she saw was sincerity. "Who are you and what have you done with Roderick Albright?" she teased, trying to mask the emotion she felt. He laughed, but there was seriousness in his eyes. Perhaps he finally grew up, or perhaps he remembered what truly matters. It was almost like dating again, but with the caution of someone who had been burned before. Helen maintained barriers, clear boundaries. They didn't share the same house. There was no physical intimacy. But little by little, through long nightly conversations, painful confessions, and difficult questions, a new foundation began to form between them. On one of those nights when Helen was 7 months pregnant, her belly impossibly large and discomforts multiplying, she finally asked the question she had been avoiding. "Why do you want us to work out so badly?" They were on the balcony of the new apartment, watching the sunset over the Hudson River. Roderick was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Because you make me want to be better, he finally replied. Not to impress, not to keep up appearances, but genuinely better. And because in the 5 years we were married, even in the worst moments, I was never as happy as in the moments I was with you. He turned to face her. I know I messed everything up. I know I started our story with an unforgivable lie, but what I feel for you, what we built together, that was never fake. Helen felt tears well up in her eyes. Damn pregnancy hormones, she thought, but knew it wasn't just that. It was the exhaustion of fighting against her own feelings, the fear of being deceived again, the stubborn hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could start over. I'm scared, Roderick, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. I'm scared to trust you again and discover that it's just another role you're playing. I know. He didn't try to touch her, respecting the space she had established between them, and I'm willing to prove every day, for as long as it takes, that I've changed, that I've learned, that the man I am now is real. That night, when Roderick left, Helen stayed on the balcony for a long time, thinking. Perhaps it was time to lower her guard a little. Not completely, not yet, but enough to see if what was growing between them could be stronger, truer than the past. The pregnancy progressed, and with it, the risks increased. In short, the 30th week, Helen began to show signs of preeclampsia. The doctor recommended hospitalization for constant monitoring. We need to keep you and the babies under observation, he explained. Your blood pressure is very high, and with quadruplets, any complication can become serious quickly. The hospital became Helen's new home, a private room, constant monitoring, restricted visits. Roderick practically moved in, sleeping in an armchair beside the bed, working remotely when necessary, refusing to leave her alone for more than a few hours. It was during these weeks of confinement that the last barriers between them began to fall. Without distractions, without escape, they talked about everything, fears, dreams, regrets, hopes. Roderick confessed the panic he felt about fatherhood, the fear of repeating the mistakes of his own father, absent and cold. Helen admitted her insecurity about being a mother to 4 children at once, the dread of not being enough for all of them. On one particularly difficult night, when Helen's blood pressure rose alarmingly and doctors considered an emergency C-section, Roderick held her hand tightly as they awaited the test results. It was the first time they had touched so intimately in months. If anything happens to me, Helen whispered, fear showing in her voice. Promise you'll take care of them, that you'll love them enough for both of us. Nothing will happen to you, he replied firmly, his eyes fixed on hers. But I promise. I promise to love them more than anything in the world. And I promise to love you the same way if you let me. When the doctor returned with the news that her blood pressure had stabilized and that the C-section could be postponed, Helen realized she was still holding Roderick's hand. And for the first time she didn't feel like letting go. In the 32nd week, the doctors decided it was time. The quadruplets needed to be born. The risk to Helen was getting too great, and the babies were strong enough to survive outside the womb, though they would likely need a period in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. The C-section was scheduled for the next morning. The night before, Roderick brought a small bouquet of wildflowers to the hospital room. For good luck, he said, placing them in a glass of water beside the bed. Helen smiled, touching the delicate petals. Are you ready for this? 4 babies. That once? Honestly, I'm terrified. He sat on the edge of the bed. But I've also never been so sure of anything in my life. They spent the night talking softly, planning the immediate future, discussing names, imagining what the little ones' faces would be like. At some point, without realizing exactly how, Helen found herself in Roderick's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I missed you, she murmured, already half asleep. I never stopped being here, he replied, gently kissing the top of her head. The surgery took place the next morning. The operating room was full of doctors and nurses, prepared to receive 4 premature newborns. Roderick, dressed in surgical scrubs, held Helen's hand as the anesthesiologist administered the epidural. Everything will be fine, he promised, though his own voice trembled slightly with nervousness. The birth was a sequence of intense, almost surreal moments. First came Raphael, 1.8 kilo, a strong cry that filled the room. Then Sophia, 1.7 kilo, quiet but alert, her eyes open as if studying the new world around her. Next, Louis, 1.9 kilo, a miniature copy of Roderick. And finally, little Amanda, the smallest at 1.6 kilos, but with surprisingly powerful lungs. Roderick alternated between the head of the bed, where he held Helen's hand, and the spot where each baby was quickly examined before being taken to the NICU. His expressions alternated between concern, awe, and a joy so profound it overflowed in silent tears. "They're perfect," he whispered to Helen when the last baby had been taken away. "All of them. And you were amazing." Helen, exhausted but radiant, felt that something fundamental had changed within her. The birth of her children didn't erase the past, didn't undo the lies nor magically heal the wounds. But it had created a new reality, a new present that demanded to be lived fully. "I want them to have a real family," she said, as she was prepared to go to the recovery room. "Not separated parents who barely speak, not a cold and calculated shared custody agreement. A real family, with real love." Roderick squeezed her hand tightly, understanding what she was saying. "I want that too," he replied, "more than anything else in the world." "It won't be easy," she warned. "We still have many things to resolve, much trust to rebuild." "We have time," he said simply. "We have the rest of our lives." The first few months with the quadruplets were a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and joys. After 3 weeks in the NICU, the babies were finally able to go home. Helen and Roderick decided that she would temporarily move back into the mansion on the Upper East Side, which offered more space and comfort for the newborns. "Just until we find a more permanent solution," Helen clarified, determined to maintain some degree of independence. But in truth, the permanent solution was forming naturally day by day. Roderick kept his promise to step away from the company, dedicating himself fully to his new family. He woke up for night feedings, changed diapers without complaint, soothed crying babies in the early hours so Helen could get some rest. "I never imagined you'd be this kind of father," she commented one night, watching him rock 2 babies at once, one in each arm, with a skill she never would have expected from the old Roderick. "Neither did I," he admitted with a tired smile, "but I wouldn't trade this for anything." Daily life together, shared challenges, small victories celebrated together gradually rebuilt the bridge between them. It was no longer the idealized and naive love of the beginning, nor the marriage of appearances of previous years. It was something deeper, more mature, forged through pain, forgiveness, and the conscious choice to stay together. 6 months after the quadruplets' birth, on a rare night when all the babies were asleep at the same time, Helen found Roderick alone on the balcony, looking out at the sea. Without saying anything, she stopped beside him, letting their shoulders touch lightly. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How close I came to losing all of this," he replied, his voice low and contemplative. "How empty my life could have been, no matter how much money or power I accumulated." Helen observed his profile against the night sky. The man beside her was not perfect, far from it. He still had flaws, still made mistakes. But he was real, authentic in a way the old Roderick never was. "You know what's funny?" she said. "That message from Clara, the one that was supposed to separate us forever. In the end, it was what brought us here." "How so?" "If she hadn't revealed the truth, maybe we would have continued in that charade, you absent, and focused only on work. Me, unhappy and invisible. Perhaps we needed that rupture to build something true." Roderick reflected on this for a moment. "You're right." He turned to face her, his eyes seeking hers in the dim light. "Helen, I know we're still finding our way, but I want you to know. I'm committed to this. To you, to our children, to the family we're building. Not out of obligation, not for appearances, but because it's what I want, with all my heart." Helen smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Me too." The kiss they shared then was different from any other. It wasn't driven by blind passion or social convention. It was a promise, a new beginning, the foundation of something they both now knew was too precious to be wasted. Life went on, with all the challenges that four babies bring. Sleepless nights, health worries, constant adaptation. But also with indescribable joys, first smiles, first words, unique personalities emerging. Raphael, determined and curious. Sophia, observant and calm. Louis, laughing and affectionate. Amanda, stubborn and courageous. Roderick truly stepped away from business, maintaining only a consultative role in the company he had built. Instead, he started a foundation focused on supporting low-income families with multiple pregnancies, a project that combined his business experience with his new passion for fatherhood. Helen, when the babies turned 1, gradually resumed her career as an architect, opening a small firm specializing in affordable housing projects. She found a balance that would never have been possible in their old arrangement, with Roderick's full support, who now understood that her professional fulfillment was as important as his. The mansion on the Upper East Side was sold. It was too big, too laden with memories of the past. In its place, they bought a spacious but cozy house in Hoboken, New Jersey, with a view of the sea and a huge garden where 4 children could run freely. A house chosen together, decorated together, a home in the true sense of the word. On the Quadruplets' 2nd birthday, after a chaotic and joyful party with family and close friends, Helen found Roderick alone on the beach in front of the house, watching the sunset. She joined him, feeling the warm sand beneath her bare feet. "Happy?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "More than I ever believed possible," he replied, pulling her into an embrace. "Did you know that today marks exactly 7 years since our first conversation at that architecture exhibition? You remember that? I remember every important moment between us, the good and the bad." He kissed her forehead gently. "But mostly I remember the incredible woman who gave me a second chance when I least deserved it." Helen smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Perhaps I knew deep down that there was something true between us, even when everything seemed like a lie. Or perhaps you're simply better than I am at seeing potential in people, just as you see potential in an architectural project." He paused as if gathering courage. "Helen, I know our marriage began for the wrong reasons, and I completely understand if you want to keep things as they are now. But—" He pulled away slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. "I would like to ask you to marry me again, this time for the right reasons. This time with total honesty and true love." Helen felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Yes, I want to start over with you." They kissed on the beach as the sun disappeared over the horizon, painting the sky red and gold. Behind them, on the porch of the house, 4 small figures watched, still not fully understanding the significance of the moment, but feeling instinctively the strength of the love that had overcome so many obstacles to get there. Later that night, with the Quadruplets finally asleep, Helen and Roderick sat on the balcony, sharing a glass of wine and talking softly under the starry sky. "I don't think our children will ever believe it when we tell them our story," she commented, laughing softly. "How their father married their mother because of a business deal, how they almost separated, and how 4 babies brought them back together." "It's quite a story," Roderick agreed. "But you know what matters most? The ending." He took her hand, kissing it gently. "Or rather, the new beginning." Helen nodded, feeling a deep certainty settle in her heart. The path had been winding, full of pain and deceit, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, building day by day a love that, unlike the first, was not based on illusions or interests, but on conscious choices, true forgiveness, and a commitment that surpassed any contract. "To our new beginning," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "And to all the beginnings yet to come," he completed, clinking his glass against hers. The clinking of crystal sounded like a promise in the quiet night, a promise that, no matter what challenges the future brought, they would face them together, stronger because they had been broken and rebuilt, wiser because they had known the pain of lies and the freedom of truth. And in a room upstairs, 4 small beings slept peacefully, unaware that their very existence had been the miracle that transformed a story of deceit into a journey of redemption. 4 heartbeats that, even before they were born, had taught their parents the most valuable lesson of all, that true love is not found in perfection, but in the courage to rebuild from the ruins, to forgive the unforgivable, and to choose, every day, to start again.